Welcome to the Defensive Line Podcast, powered by Intrusion, Inc.
Well, hi, Carm. How are you today?
Very good, Tony. Thanks for asking. How about yourself?
It's good to see you. And I'm looking forward to this conversation today. But for those who don't know either of us, maybe we should do a quick introduction of who we are and why we're talking today. So I'll let you go first. Who are you and why are we talking today?
Sure. So, hi, everybody. I'm Carmine Cicalese. I'm originally from Roselle Park, New Jersey. I went into the military in 1987, graduated from the United States Military Academy, went to the Army Signal Corps, learned a lot about the radio wave communications. And then that was 87 when I graduated. So, again, by the late 90s, though, or even early 90s, I had a boss who was very interested in the internet, which was not yet a commercial product. And so we got him connected at a whopping 9,600 baud.
Boy,
It was pretty
remember those
impressive.
days.
Yeah, right. And then I went over to Fort Meade, and I was in an organization that was responsible for helping protect the defense industrial base. And by that time, I had to manage a Novell 4.01 server. Again, dating myself. Also had some Unix boxes and the like, and then we also did a Windows NT upgrade. But that organization was very interesting because they also did the Army's polygraph text or lie detections, and they also did Tempest, which is containerizing electronic waves within the radio system. For example, the gentleman took me up to the lab and he pointed a directional antenna at the back of the computer and was able to read the screen just because of the emanations that come off of the computer. And then I also had the Army's first cyber forensics lab. So I was there. From there, I went to the National Security Agency. Spent a couple of years there on the information assurance side. Of course, they also have the signals intelligence side, and I saw some of that. And I got into something called information operations or information warfare. And cyber warfare, cybersecurity got wrapped up in that and information assurance. And then from there, deployed during the wars. I spent a lot of time throwing the nation's information warfare arsenal at our adversaries. And then I went and got to teach about it for a few years. And then I went to the Pentagon and helped write the Army's cyberspace strategy. When I left after 29 years in 2016, meandered about for a little bit, trying some different things, then eventually decided to start my own company. And we did a lot of consulting company to Department of Defense, doing like holistic information, cyber warfare type advisement. And then I got a whiff of the private side and I just decided to make a shift and shifted over to doing just cybersecurity for SLED, state, local, and education, and small and medium-sized businesses, and help them get started. And now we provide the people expertise to these small, mid-sized businesses so that they can stay secure. We help improve their people, processes, and technology. And on the technology side, a lot of times, I like to say that the first important cybersecurity decision you make is to have a great IT provider who can provide those basic technologies that you need, antivirus, patch updates, multi-factor authentication, and the like. But then a lot of them, they hit their limitations, and their limitations are based on maybe the number of people that they have and whatever it is they offer. So if they don't offer it, they don't know about it. And that's where we try to use our knowledge and help fill in the gaps. And we work with the IT team and the company to also help fill in their technology gaps. And one of the things that we learned about was like the intrusion shield. And it's a great solution. And several of our clients use that because it applies. And that's how I met some of the people in Intrusion, and they connected us together. So that's kind of how we got here. At least
Yeah, that's right. Well, great background for what you're doing today, for sure. Um, I'm Tony Scott, CEO of Intrusion. I came here 4.5 years or so ago. Um, in my background, I've worked mostly large companies. Working backwards, I was the federal CIO for the U.S. government during the last 2 years of Obama administration. And probably the most remarkable thing about that experience was we discovered shortly after I took the job, the OPM breach, which was 21 million identities that had been compromised.
One of them's mine.
You got a letter, I'm
Yeah.
sure. I will tell you from a personal experience, it's a little weird getting a letter that you helped write in the mail. So I got one too, because I had a clearance. But before that, I worked with VMware, Microsoft, the Walt Disney Company, all of those as corporate CIO, and then CTO at General Motors. But I started my career really at Sun Microsystems, and you mentioned the Tempest stuff. One of the things that I got to do was I was doing factory automation work for Sun, and we were shipping so many boxes to our customers that often I couldn't get the equipment I wanted or needed to do our factory automation. But I discovered this secret little stash of equipment that um, was the returns from the Tempest program that we had. And I didn't care. I thought they were great boxes, but they were a lot heavier than the
Yeah.
machines that we were shipping to our customers. Occasionally, we would get returns from DoD or intelligence community and so on, and we couldn't sell them to anybody else. So I used them internally, and they were great in a factory environment because they were impervious to all of the stuff that typically goes on in the factory. So it made me chuckle when you mentioned that. Um, so let's talk a little bit about just the state of cybersecurity today, and we're really fortunate to have partners like you. But in your career, you've seen a ton of change, obviously, in both the threat side as well as the tools that you can use to protect yourself. How would you assess the state of affairs today? Are we getting more balanced in that, in terms of better tools, or are the bad guys still way out in front in a lot of cases?
Wow, that's a great question. So I'll start here, and I kind of alluded to it during my introduction, or I've said this so many times I forget who I said it to. Frankly, is I like to say that the first important cybersecurity decision a small mid-sized business makes is to choose a great IT partner, again, to get started on the basics. But when it comes to tools and solutions, there can be a temptation to boil the ocean, and because there are no limit to the number of solutions out there. And what and I'm really seeing this with the IT, but that distinction between an IT partner, if an IT partner can do this much and an MSP can do this much, and an MSSP can fill up the whole screen with your technology solutions. What I'm seeing is in here that there is a real gap of solutions that should be used. And I'm really now what I'm seeing is I'm starting to see more businesses are being more proactive. The business owners are saying, "Hey, I need to do something here before I have an incident," and we are getting a lot more traffic on that. And what happens is, I mean, this is no kidding. A call yesterday, a law firm, they had a breach. And then after the breach, as part of the fixing it, the IT company said to them, "Well, we enabled MFA, multi-factor authentication." I'm like, "What do
Right.
you mean you just enabled it today?"
Just now, yeah, that's
You
crazy.
know, in the past week. Mind boggling. That's a law firm you're talking about, right? That's just a basic. And and then the other part of it was I said, well, and we installed Huntress, in EDR. And that's great. And the business owner, to his credit, said, That's great. How come I didn't have this before? How come you never recommended this to me?" And what boggles my mind, Well, the MFA, that's unacceptable. That's just off the table. That you know, as a business, do you ever look, I mean, to upsell and increase, your offerings to a company or business owner? Sure. But this is just a matter of practicality. If you have access to it, why wouldn't you have at least introduced them to it and let them make that decision? If you haven't, because you again, it goes back to boiling the ocean. I can't boil the ocean. I do what I can when I can with with the resources available. But you always have to go back to your client and re-engagement with them and say, people, whether it's people, processes, or technology, let's look at what are we doing over this next year in those categories.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. It reminds me of a neighbor I once had who was a tool nut. And you'd go in this guy's garage and he had every tool imaginable under the sun. There's no thing he couldn't possibly do with the tools that he had. But the only problem was, and I diagnosed this really quickly, is he was a tool collector, not a knowledgeable tool
Yeah.
user, right? And so if I ever asked him, well, how do you do this or how do you do that? His answer was, well, I have the tool for it, but I have no idea how to actually, use it in the way that's, appropriate. And I think that same thing is true in many cases with the proliferation of tools in cyber. It's, yeah, there's a bunch of good things out there, but if you don't know how to use them and if you don't put them together in the right way, and configure things appropriately and properly, the best tool in the world isn't going to save your butt when it comes to a cybersecurity incident. So I always think of that neighbor when I hear people saying, "Oh, I'm good. I got this tool," or "I'm good. I've got this other tool." And you really need to go a lot deeper and say, how are you using that tool and is it configured properly and many of those kinds of things. So I'm with you on that part of the problem completely.
When it comes to those recommendations, though, what's the right recommendation? Because there are certain things when I see, and I'm like, okay, that's great, but I think you're getting ahead of yourself. Or I say, I think your IT provider is selling, your MSP is selling you something that you don't yet need, because you haven't done the groundwork behind it, or they're selling it. It's like there are two things. I was talking to like a company that does bank assessments, and they were sharing with me the cybersecurity model that their MSSP provides them, and everything that they were doing, and it was all very good, except there were two things I disagreed with. And so they should not be selling you a pen test. If they're providing it to you, you should not be buying a pen test from
That's
them,
right.
right? Or these IT companies are saying, "Oh, we can do pen tests now." It's like, why would I pay you to pen test the system you're supposed to defend? That's just, again, the fox guarding the hen house
Yes, for sure.
example. And the other one was at the top of the pyramid was, providing that virtual type CISO or something like that. And it was like, wait a second, why would you're outsourcing your C-suite to somebody who's overseeing themselves? So there are times where those solutions, I mean, you do want to add to it incrementally when you can, but there are some of them like, no, that's just a bad recommendation, or they're not. You should do that, but they're not the ones who should do
Exactly. Yeah, it reminds me of the old adage, you can do the right things and you also have to do things right.
it.
And they're often not exactly the same thing. So that's absolutely a case in point. There's a lot of buzz today around AI and all of the things that it can do. And in fact, there was an article that came out today that said some new capability that Claude AI has is going to eliminate all software bugs, in all software eventually. And that's somehow going to make the world completely safe and so on. And I was rolling on the floor laughing that that's not going to happen. Because one of the challenges is, and we touched on it, I think, before, is you can have the most bug-free software in the world, but if you don't implement it the right way, you're not any safer. Um, and one of the big weaknesses, obviously, that you and I both have dealt with in our past is the people side of things. I worked with a CIO once who, when we would do speaking engagements together, he'd ask the audience, how many vulnerable points do you have in your organization? And people didn't know how to answer the question. He'd say, well, let me make it easy for you. How many people do you have in your organization? That's the starting point for how many points of vulnerability you have. And I'm sure you see this in your business, but that continues to be a problem. And I think always will, that humans are vulnerable to, whether intentionally or not, making mistakes and being the open door through which, the bad guys march in. Um, and it's one of the reasons we've focused at Intrusion, and I know you know this, on monitoring network activity in real time, um, to be a, create awareness, greater situational awareness of all of the things that are going on in your network. Not just the presence of malware, but surveillance activity and other things that are leading indicators that maybe something untoward or undesirable are happening in your network. And I would draw on your experience, in your past. I'm sure that many of the things you dealt with weren't just a complete surprise that they happened. There were probably lots of indicators ahead of time that, there was a series of things that led up to, various breaches or various activities. And I'll end my question by saying, bank robbers don't just show up at the bank with a gun and say, stick them up. They surveil the place. They know when the guards are taking their breaks. They know when the Brinks truck arrives. They know when the B team tellers are on duty and so on. And I feel like our cyber attackers are now doing a lot more of that cyber surveillance kind of things, to know when to attack, how to attack, and what's vulnerable. But are you seeing evidence of that in your business at all?
Y- I have I'm involved with another business called Digital Privacy and Protection. And that looks at protecting individuals and families, and absolutely see that. I mean, the bad guys. I mean, they use like social media as a hint as to whether or not you're available. So even the FBI has proven that the majority of like burglaries that happen when someone's away on vacation and they had advertised it on social media, so somebody knew that they were gone. And we've even seen examples where the bad guys will say, "Hey, involved in a scam, especially like, um, hey, you violated it. This is the IRS. We're agents," and they actually come to the person's house for the pickup, for the cash pickup, right?
My goodness.
I, so at the family individual level, absolutely do see that direct physical surveillance and exploiting the privacy that people make available. On the business side, I still think most of it happens technically, and that's where they're looking. Um, but again, their ability to exploit people socially is still there because we have a LinkedIn presence or something like that business wise and professional wise, it gives them some type of indicator of what to send. And now, so, in our business, I get a lot of subscription, right,
Sure.
type of stuff. I just was thinking to myself, like, how do I know that that unsubscribe link isn't a malware link? And
Yes.
I thought about that popped in my head a couple of years ago. Well, guess what? That's a thing now, right? And it's like, and I have a tendency is like, this Saturday, I'm going to take Saturday and I'm just going to unsubscribe from all of this unnecessary stuff. But then you're like, you know what? It's just easier to block it.
Yeah. Might
And
make you more vulnerable by unsubscribing.
yeah,
Yeah.
so the bad guys never stop thinking, and it's even the most mundane things that they can throw out there. And just like you said, it's always been said to me is the people are half your attack surface. And when you look at people, processes, and technology, are the people trained on your policies? Do they actually know what to do? And if I can like talk a little bit about like kind of like go into like the cybersecurity framework, the 6 domains: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, govern. Govern's at the middle of it, right? That's your policies and your processes. This is how we do business on a day-to-day basis. This is how we do business when the stuff hits the fan, right? My experience, especially in the market where I am in, most companies are pretty good at identifying, you know, their critical data and where's their data stored and their, hardware, software inventories, but maybe not so good on identifying their threats and vulnerabilities. They haven't gotten to that far of a depth, which is a key piece of it. And then protect, they're often pretty good at. And then again, those are the things I mentioned earlier in our podcast about the basics that you have to do. But then when you get into detect, well, maybe. I mean, you could kind of say antivirus has a little bit of it's a lot protect and a little bit of detect if it detects something. But do you have an EDR? Do you have some type of endpoint detection, or do you have some type of intrusion detection system, intrusion protection system, and the like? And then when you get into respond, there's not much at all. And recover about halfway because they have backups. But do they have adequate backups? Do they have at least, 3 copies of it, 2 different types, and one of them cold? Probably not. Have they ever tested the backups? Probably not. But then you get the governed. There's not much there either.
Yeah.
So,
That's the
like,
thing that
if you don't have the
probably
governed
is
piece, the people don't know what to do.
that's the thing that surprised me the most throughout my career. Whenever I took a new CIO role, I'd go through my checklist of what are your practices, and backups is one of the things that you check. It's one of the top things on the list. But when I would ask the question, when's the last time you tested the backup to see if you could actually recover? I can't tell you the number of times I got the blank stare like, oh, um, we haven't done that in a while. And okay, well, you know, now we're going to do it regularly kind of thing. And it's, I think, a parallel to another pet peeve of mine, which is, but I think it's especially true in cyber, is you don't get good at something unless you practice it a lot. You don't get to Carnegie Hall to play, you know, in front of a big audience unless you've done a lot of rehearsing with whatever your talent is, playing violin or singing or whatever. And in the event of a cyber attack, that's your Carnegie Hall. That's the time for you to perform at your best to, do the things that need to be done. And if you haven't practiced that a lot, by definition, you're just not going to be good enough at it, in my view. And so the best in class organizations I see are ones that have a talented team, like you mentioned earlier, but who take that extra step of practicing regularly and under different scenarios too. And I think all of that tends to make a team better at responding when and if it happens. It's usually a question of when, not if, in my experience.
And you know what? It doesn't have to be like a cyber attack that creates it, though, either.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, it could just be some other type of, malfunction um, in the operating system, power outage, whatever the case may be that you have to recover from.
Well, it reminds me of, I've often gotten asked the question, what keeps you up at night? And my response is always the same. Let me tell you about the things that have gotten me up at night. And most of them are not cyber attacks. They're things like what you just said, somebody fat fingered something, or a piece of equipment failed, or, things of that nature where um, we couldn't plan for it, but, you can't plan on a piece of equipment failing or somebody fat fingering a setting, but you can practice a response to those kinds of things and figure out how you're going to respond and recover from them. And and those are the things that in my career have paid off big time. Where, as you say, you practice a whole bunch of different scenarios, not just cyber related things. And quite frankly, some things start looking like it's a cyber thing, and then it turns out to be something else completely. So uh, I think there's lots of lessons learned from that experience.
We had a client that was around the bulk of their support team was around a large metropolitan city. And you say, well, did you ever stop and think about what happens if you have an area wide power outage? And it has happened in the past. And
Yes.
that's like worse than the pandemic scenario because they're distributed, right? So the pandemic's really not going to affect them so much unless that individual person is not, but they're not going to get that, like, I can't go into the office, a type of thing. But if that power thing comes around and you're so concentrated there in this rather small area, what if? And being able to respond to that, again, it's not just a cyber attack, but my experience is that at the mid-market and down, nobody's thinking about that. So we step in and do it.
Well,
And
and you could have an event like that that, you know, causes now new vulnerabilities that you didn't plan for. Like what happens when the power goes out, what stuff still works and what stuff doesn't work. Those are all important things, I think, for organizations to think through. And the power is going to go out from time to time. Let's just face it. That's a reality of life, you know.
or you saw it as a CIO, especially if you have a cloud services. What happens, and if you're cloud dependent, what happens when you have Microsoft has a glitch? And it happens,
Yeah.
right? You
Yeah.
can't do anything.
Or
You know,
CrowdStrike or,
right?
any provider that's providing a service. That's right.
And you still have to think through that process of, what's my fallback? How do I do things? Again, it's not a cyber attack. It's just a systems outage somewhere, but you're completely reliant on it. And again, nobody in the company thinks about it, so we do the thinking for them on it. Right? It's just that you can use cyber attack as a pretext for that discussion, but that's a capability that we bring in terms of people expertise. Again, it goes back to people and processes to support the technology. And what happens when one of them fails? When the people fail, what's the processes to fill and technologies to fill the gap?
What's a typical conversation when you're engaging with a customer the first time? How does the conversation start? How does it go? You know, what's a typical sort of, initial set of conversations that you might have with a potential customer?
So if we're dealing with somebody that has not been breached, and that's where we prefer to be. We prefer to be on the proactive side of
Yes.
things. Just because anymore, especially on the reactive side, the first calls to the insurance company, and the next calls from them to their people to come fix the things or identify what the problem is. But when we go in, uh, I think the first things that we really start to look at, and we developed a tool based around the cybersecurity framework, and it's an open questionnaire. and you sit down with them, and we advise. It's roughly anywhere between 6 to 10 questions per domain, and we ask them, "Hey, have you done this and done that?" So I kind of alluded to this earlier. So we said, do you know what your critical data is? What is what is your critical data? You know, make them think about it. Okay, now could you tell about the measures around that, right? And the protect part is pretty easy because you're just kind of going through. Oh, do you have antivirus? Do you have multi-factor authentication? Do you use something other than SMS texting for multi-factor authentication? More points, right? Um, and then you get into, do you have an EDR? What's your response plan? Have you ever tested your response plan? Right. So we developed that questionnaire to get into all of those different domains to help the business owner visualize what's going on, because the the the, the first myth that I run into is cybersecurity is IT, and therefore it's an IT risk. I said, no, that's
None of
limitation.
this risk.
IT's job is to make sure that your technology it gets to your available data to support your business processes. Cybersecurity there's some relationship there, but cybersecurity's job is to make sure that your people, processes, and technology make sure your data is available, confidential, nobody else accesses it. That's not supposed to, and has integrity. Nobody's manipulated that. And a lot of that's outside of that technology and business process aspect. So by limiting themselves to IT and technology, they can't visualize it. So they're kind of just stuck on IT. But make them realize that the problem is bigger than that and the different aspects, so they can sit there and say, okay, I'm 50% in 3 of the 6 areas, 10% in 2 areas, and I'm 0% in the other 2. How do we start, coloring in the boxes? And where should we start? And so that's where our typical, conversation goes. Sometimes there's like immediate technology recommendations. Okay, look, the one example I talked about earlier. If you don't have multi-factor authentication, what rock have you been living under, right? Well, you got to get that in first. If you don't have antivirus, you got to get that in too, right? Those would be like the must. Then we'd say, backups. You got to get something going if you don't have backups. Those are like 3 examples that if you don't have them, that has to get done first. But then we go back up and say, okay, so top down, let's go back up to the strategy and policies, and let's start building this downward, and looking at, what are the low hanging fruit that we can afford to do, and then you start to look at the higher risk areas, and most of the times those are in detect and respond, and you know I can't afford a 24/7 security operations center, so you're going to have to come up with some better things.
How do you talk to a customer about their level of risk tolerance? Because I imagine it varies from business to business. If you're a regulated industry, you obviously have you know, less tolerance for risk than maybe other ones. And I know there's no precise measure of that, but in all the conversations I've ever had with customers, it enters somewhere along the line where you have to have that, risk tolerance sort of conversation. Wondering how you do that.
The related conversation, of course, I have in there is, do you have cyber insurance?
Yeah. Sure.
And actually, we put that on our checklist. And do you have, not so much do you have it, it's like, do you know who to call when you have a breach? And do you know what their process is? Because again, that's all part of the systemic question. If you have insurance, then you probably start to do some type of risk quantification. And okay, this is how much this is costing me. But it's again, do you understand what your underwriting requirements are? Have you met them? Do you know that? I had a customer, we were helping them, and their IT team shared the underwriting with us, and I said, and they said, "Oh, we think they're good." And I looked at them, and was like, "No, they're not." I mean, how could you say that? There are at least three areas where they're not good, and one of them was, have you been breached, or have you had an event in the past 3 years? Why don't you help us help you answer that? Say, yes, this happened, but here's all the things that we have done, and this is why we're in a much better place. So, and so part of that risk quantification discussion is, how do I improve that situation so I actually reduce the risk of something happening and reduce the premium? So they have to work hand in hand. So when I talk about risk, I typically go to the insurance question first, because, and then of course you have to bring in examples to the whoever the client is about. Do you understand this is what a typical breach costs? What's the likelihood of this happening? Well, actually, it's pretty high. Here's what you can expect if you have insurance out of a payoff. They only, they're you get partial or no payments roughly 25 to 30% of the time.
Yeah. And
And
here's what's covered under your policy, and
yeah,
here's what's not. And is there adequate dollar coverage to cover those things that are likely to happen in the event of a breach? I think those are all great conversations to
you know,
have that risk tolerance sort of framework in people's heads.
sometimes, the ideal situation, we would go in and do a risk assessment. And if they have a compliance standard, of course you use that. For example, they have a CMMC, if then we're going to use that. But if they don't have a compliance standard, well, then we typically would recommend, probably like a CIS IG1 or Center for Internet Security Implementation Group 1. Let's start there, right? And do that assessment, identify those gaps and vulnerabilities and the like, and then develop a plan and build it out from there. Sometimes though, business owners like, okay, how much is that going to be? And it's a tough pill to swallow to say, well, it's going to cost me X, but it's not going to fix anything. It's going to tell me all the problems I got. And a kind of a fallback position is to say, okay, well, let's look at your insurance policy. Or you don't have one, let's qualify for one. And so we work, with, a couple of insurance brokers, um, to make sure that, because they're good and that they're very much into cybersecurity. They're not just like selling like an ad, I call it, just an add-on policy because, well, we offer insurance. So here's your add-on policy. No, it's something that's credible. Um, it's going to pay out. It's going to provide, some details as well. Let's use that. Is it optimal? No, but it's better than nothing. And that leads to what I call cybersecurity by walking around. If you remember the book from the 80s and 90s, Management by Walking Around,
They
well,
do.
I call it cybersecurity by walking around. Did we do a risk assessment? No. Is it suboptimal? Yes. But you get in the door and then you can start asking questions and looking under the hood. And so you've done X. Now let's look what else can be done and help prioritize it. And that's the big thing. What we try to be, you've got to be cognizant that, in our space, you're talking typically 100 million in revenue and down. You don't have endless money to throw at cybersecurity. This is, what can we get done this year? How can we improve our foxhole? How can we get incrementally better and just advance it? And those are the different discussions and styles and techniques that we use to have with these business owners. And again, if um, the ones that come to us before something happened are typically going to be um, great customers to support because they want to get better. Now, they might not have, you know, bottomless resources. Nobody does, but they might not have them, but that's okay. We'll get it done over time. And at least as we get started and you're prepared for it, just having somebody at the ready who knows what to do to help you out if something does happen is just so much better than where you were before.
Yeah. And it's good to have customers that you can have that kind of interchange and dialogue with. Some of the hardest ones I've ever dealt with are ones that were in complete denial, that there was anything necessary or needed to improve their situation. It's kind of the, uh, you know, I haven't had an accident yet, therefore I'm a good driver, you know, and of course we all know sometimes accidents happen, even if you are a good driver. So it's better to have that more humble self-awareness, I think, especially in our space. What are you looking forward to? What are the things that, in the next year or two you're keeping your eye on that, maybe for people that are listening to this, might help them, um, in their thinking about business planning, for the next year or two, in the space that we're in?
Yeah, so about 2 years ago, yeah, it's been almost, yeah, about 2 years ago, I was at a, conference with the, Digital Directors Network, and this was in Chicago, and, um, the focus of the group was actually that AI is coming, and your job is going to be to secure it. And at the time, I would say that the mood in cybersecurity was a little bit on the downward trend,
Mm,
because what I saw was that around the 2022 to 24 mark is companies made some changes. Some of it was like based on personnel. It was all personnel based, but either personnel policies, but or expectation of AI is coming. I need to be prepared for it. But they, like cybersecurity, they throw AI into the technology bucket,
mhm.
budget bucket. Well, where can I save money? Hey, I haven't been breached in a while. I can downsize my cybersecurity staff, and a lot of mid-level directors got let go. By the way, they work with me now, so thank you for that. um, and they became available. But what they left behind was maybe the technician, but the technician isn't a big picture type of person. And maybe I'll talk about that in a bit. But anyway, there was this kind of like, wait a second, we were getting important in cybersecurity, and now AI is stealing our steam. Well, now it's just kind of come around, and I get people calling me and saying, "Hey, what do I do about this AI business?" So now it's like, yeah, how do you? It's not to me. It's not just about using AI, but it's how do you keep AI secure for these different businesses? And again, if I had a dime for every time an AI salesperson told me, "Oh, your data will never get pulled up because the algorithm won't allow it. It's just an impossible situation," right? Yeah, right. No, that's not true.
Not
Um,
gonna happen that way. Yeah.
right. So, even when we looked at ourselves internally, I said, "Well, how are we going to use this? Where does it apply best for us?" And, of course, implicitly, we're looking at what's the most secure way to do that. So, really, AI is going to enable technologies, and it enables the bad guy, of course. But on the technology side, I'm like, you know what? Companies like Intrusion are going to use it. I don't have to worry about that aspect of it. Right? It's going to come with the technologies. But the anticipation of helping companies secure their AI tools and their data is what's interesting me is most interesting me to what's most interesting to me right now. And the other one, and I think it's kind of related in there, is I'm seeing this dissatisfaction of companies with their IT providers. And I think that using AI is going to expedite that dissatisfaction, because if they don't know how to secure it and they're going to be vulnerable, they're going to need to do more.
Yeah. I made a prediction at the beginning of 26 that was not a stretch and not even brilliant, but I predicted when asked, what my big prediction for 26 was. I said, I think there's going to be a big blow up caused by AI, where some major, privacy violation or other thing like that is caused by the misuse of AI. And it's been true of every technology evolution since the dawn of time, where there's good uses for it, but then there's the unintended consequences of that thing. And when the big blow up happens, then you get, regulation, and you get more critical thinking about how we should be using these tools than the euphoria that comes from, oh, we've got this brand new great thing and it's all good and, you know, happy and, hearts and all that sort of stuff. And I'm sure we're going to see that in 26 for sure, at different levels, but there's probably going to be one big one that gets everybody's attention. And then, a bunch of things will happen after that. So,
If I can give you like a little bit of an example, it
yeah.
wasn't necessarily a big one, but this is so practical to a business that people haven't even thought about it. Again, speaking with a different like bank examiner, regulator, and he was, assessing a particular business, and he had an account, and so he just jumped into their AI instance. I think it was Copilot, and he asked, "What's the CEO's position on policy X?"
Hmm.
And it told him everything that the CEO had ever queried in the AI, to include emails,
My goodness.
right? And it was like, it was just a test. He wasn't trying, but it was like, you need to put guardrails on this. This,
Yes.
no, nobody in the business should have known what the CEO's, particular position on
Yes.
something is, because it has all types of implications to valuation of the company, stocks, whatever, because like people shouldn't be able to see that, but
Well,
they
to
could.
further your earlier analogy, this is kind of like cybersecurity by AI walking around.
Yeah.
Walking around, this is AI walking around. You're like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So we all have to be conscious of those kinds of things for sure. Yeah, I can
I'm
see
going to
that
run a test
happening.
in my company. I'm going to ask a couple of
Yeah,
people. Said, here's a prompt or something like this. Here's the basic prompt. You can manipulate this in however you want, but tell me what you get.
yeah, yeah. I think that's brilliant. We should all probably have a lot more awareness in that regard. I
And then I'll
signed the
dump it on my
first,
CTO.
yeah, I signed the first NDA today that I've seen an AI prevention clause in, which was, you will not take any of our data and put it in a AI engine for consumption that's not protected by certain guardrails and privacy things and so on. And I, smart. It's the
Yeah, no, I
right
agree.
thing to do. So
I'm still of the opinion, like, uh, I only use it for generic. I will not put, once company X goes into a document, that's not going in.
are working together. Obviously, Intrusion is in the network um, space, where we look at every packet, every uh, thing that's traversing the network, north and southbound, in and out, call homes, all of those kinds of things. So we're pretty excited about working with companies like yours to advance the cause here. And we've talked about AI. One of the things we're using AI for is to help reduce the number of false positives that um, the cybersecurity team has to deal with. Um, and I'm assuming that that's a useful development for you and your team, so that
Oh,
you can
absolutely.
focus on the most important things that are really relevant. um, cyber is a 24 by 7, 365 days a year kind of job. Do you see AI helping you and your business with some of the more laborious tasks that, people might be stuck doing today and in the future might be done by a AI agent? Is that something that's on your radar?
A little bit. Again, we're still kind of we lead with people. So really AI enables the people that we provide. All right. That's primarily. But like when it comes to the technology side of it, we're very choosy on what we do, and what we resell and what we offer because we always, excuse me, our going in position is that IT company or MSP has first dibs on it. Right? That's what they do. They provide technology. So if they have the means to do that, then we look to them to do that. But like when we're using intrusion and like we're starting to dive more into it, like with the command dashboard, is that really that's where we're going to be looking like those AI improvements that intrusion makes on that to help us focus on the client's issues better. That's a key way that we see that.
I think that's right. I don't foresee a world where we don't have a human in the loop, making the most critical decisions. Um, you know, you can trust technology to a certain point, but there will come a point where you really want somebody that's got more context and more experience and all of that, um, somewhere involved in the process. So,
We had in a cybersecurity forum recently. We had a discussion about that because so much of the basic, the entry level cybersecurity, there's almost not such a thing. It really is. It starts with IT and learning those basics of the network, and then we're talking about the technical side of cybersecurity, and then moving up into that next position. But a lot of those are becoming automated, so it's dissolving from the perception is that it's dissolving that lower level or entry level. So you have a mid level manager who's managing or implementing the AI. But how do you get somebody up to that level where they understand it if they haven't done it? And that creates an interesting workforce conundrum,
I agree
right?
with you
Because
completely.
it's like, whoa, how's my pipeline going to work, right? And do you think actually more and more of that is going to become automated? That's where it's kind of tough to see. Um, that that to me though is a bit more of the on the solution providers and the SOCs, for example, more so than what we do. Again, I think we really have to help AI help us be more efficient, um, so that we're better and faster at what we do.
Yeah, there is a world I think that we are in already where I call it YouTube University. Anything
Yeah,
you want to do, you can go, search YouTube and there'll be a dozen experts there who will tell you how to do the thing that you're trying to do, which is great on the one hand. It's the, democratization of knowledge in some respects. But to your earlier point, sometimes you don't have time to do a YouTube video search and figure out how to do certain things. You
yeah.
have to already know what to do and react more quickly. So there's probably a role for AI in that space, assisting humans, but you still need people with the right knowledge who have some idea of how the thing is put together and what the solutions are.
Now I know there are like AI counselors out there,
Hmm.
um, but actually, I don't think that AI and YouTube will help you deal with people necessarily
True.
any better. Because
Yeah,
you can AI cancel everything you want, but people still do the darndest things.
that's right.
The AI counselor there is to, agree with you and comfort you and nurture you along. But not all people are like
Yeah. I'm not going to be sitting on a couch with an AI talking to me about, well, how do you feel today, Tony? Anyway, well, this has been a great conversation. I look forward to many conversations like this in the future. And I want to thank you for your partnership with our company, Intrusion, and looking forward to all the great things we can do together going forward.
Same here. I'm very much interested in learning more and using the command dashboard, and we're going to get some of our people get some training on that, so we get the most out of it. And we're also interested in learning more about the posse program
Yes.
with the county sheriffs and the like, and the town sheriffs that you're involved with. And I want to thank you very much for the opportunity. I know you're just getting this podcast started, so to be one of the initial interviewees is a real pleasure. So thank you very much, Tony. I appreciate
Thanks.
it.
Great talking with you today.
Thanks for watching the Defensive Line Podcast, powered by Intrusion, Inc.